Jesus was Caesar. Caesar was the Messiah. Did Rome invent Jesus Christ? Now, Francesco Pirotta wrote a book called Jesus was Caesar. And today we're going to have a guest, James Valiant, to discuss his work, Francesco Pirotta, at the same time bring in his own personal thoughts on how it's not just Julius Caesar, but that the Flavian dynasty is involved in the development of the New Testament Gospels and Jesus Christ. You know, many scholars have recognized, for example, in the Gospel of Luke, that there's some connections to Josephus, even in the book of Acts. Well, if Josephus, being a very important figure in not only history, but also in the Roman Empire to the Flavian dynasty, could there not be more of a connection? Now, before you guys say, hey, get your tinfoil hat off and stop being a crazy conspiracy theorist, I want you to consider the evidence that we bring today, the parallels. I want you to say, at the end of this show, if you think that any of this stuff is significant or if any of this makes sense to you. These parallels and these connections between Julius Caesar and his life that we have historically written that predate the gospel narratives and into the gospel narratives of Jesus Christ seem very much alike, almost to the point of identical in some cases, in certain spots. Usually when we look at parallels, we look at archetypes. So some stuff may not be exact, but it's very close. And Francesco Pirotta, who's a linguist, also saw a lot of interesting things he wrote in his book of how words look very similar, or there might be changing of words. Enjoy the show. Put your comments down below. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, hit the bell so you're notified anytime we drop another video, and like this video so that YouTube can push this thing out there. We want to get the word out so other people can consider this evidence. We are MythVision. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Your host, Derek Lambert. We got a good show to go through today. I'm really looking forward to this because I love watching parallels. I love seeing connections. And Roman provenance is the position that Rome, in some way, shape, or form, is involved in the development of what we're finding in the New Testament, okay? There may be certain books that may not have its influence or enemies of Rome, but nonetheless, that is the Roman provenance idea, is that somehow Rome, whether they're Jewish aristocrats in Rome, whether they're Romans, okay, there's something going on, and we're just trying to figure it out. And I'm sure most of my audience who's watching this, James Valiant, are interested in hearing more because it's not taken serious in scholarship, mainstream scholarship today. And what we want to talk to you about today and have you talk to us back and forth, you and me are going to have, I've got some questions, obviously. I'm really excited to bring these up because I think we can have a really good dialogue, is Francesco Pirotta's book, Jesus was Caesar, and these parallels between Julius Caesar and Jesus Christ.
Right.
And your book, Creating Christ, it does more than just where Joseph Atwell focuses on the Flavian dynasty and their influence with the war. He's got a very interesting Josephus parallel to the gospel narratives. You're taking multiple aspects of these things and looking at scholarship and trying to find where this all makes the most sense. And Julius Caesar is going to be our conversation today. Julius Caesar and Jesus Christ. And I wanted to start us out. Who's Julius Caesar? Maybe give us something here. Who is he to Rome? Is he a savior to them? Is he a dictator? Is he both?
Yes.
What's going on?
Julius Caesar is one of the most consequential figures in the history of Western civilization, without a doubt. He lived in the first century before the Common Era, and born around the year 100 BCE, and was a Roman aristocrat and a Roman politician. And during his lifetime, the Roman Republic, which had endured for hundreds of years since its founding, was deteriorating and becoming, going through a process of civil wars and a political struggle, which was the culmination of generations of struggles between the aristocratic party and the Popular Party were coming to a head, and the Roman Republic was breaking down. And by the end of the first century BCE, Rome would have its first emperor, Augustus, who was in effect the heir and successor of Julius Caesar, who was the pivotal figure in the middle of the first century BCE, the first Roman to be deified and made a god, because although he was an aristocrat, he was a leader of the Popular Party, and his great successes on the battlefield made him enormously wealthy and popular. He was able to pay the debts of the poor and become all the more popular, and use his money to increase his political influence. At a certain point, the Republican Party, the aristocratic party, which was trying to defend the old republic and the power of the Senate, regarded him as a threat, perhaps someone who would make himself king. And they had good reasons for thinking that we can get into. But Julius Caesar was assassinated shortly after he was declared dictator for life, another unprecedented phenomenon. Technically not the first emperor, but his great-nephew and adopted son, he adopted in his will, Octavian, would go on to be the first emperor, Augustus. So Julius Caesar, his assassination on the Ides of March, right, in the first century, really marked the moment when the Republican Party stood up, tried to destroy Caesar, but as most assassinations are, it proved counterproductive, and it actually only empowered the Caesarian party, who then fought it out with the assassins, literally, at the Battle of Philippi, defeating them, and the Caesar party, therefore, thereafter took control. There was a battle between the heirs of Julius Caesar, if you will, Marcus Antonius, and Octavian, who would become Augustus. And that was fought out finally at the Battle of Actium in 31, leaving Augustus the sole ruler of the Roman world. Literally, they saw themselves then as world rulers.
This is interesting because there's a little documentary, Jesus with Caesar, or the Gospel of Caesar, it's called, on YouTube. And I was checking that out, and most of it is not in English, but they have subtitles and stuff. And there was some interesting parallels. So I figure I'm going to just jump right into this. Anyone who's watching this wants to hear this kind of content anyway, and we'll bounce around throwing ideas out, and you can obviously expand on it. But one of the questions I was looking at is, he takes phrases, he finds these common phrases that seem very interesting. Scholarship is clearly looking at stuff like Judas Iscariot, right? Iscariot, we can tell, is a garbled up term of Sicarii. Oh, so you're telling me the word is not Sicarii, even though we know scholarship saying, hey, this really means Sicarii. Now, if scholarship is willing to concede to these notions, are they not willing to look a little further at some other things? And I think that's where we're going to kind of go with some of these ideas, even though you got to read the book because there's too much, I'm sure.
Mainstream biblical critical scholars of the New Testament, of course, try to see as much as possible, or force it as much as possible, to see that Christianity was just an organic development within Judaism. That is becoming less and less credible to a lot of us. And even though there is really no question that it's an offshoot of Judaism, there are pagan elements, Greco-Roman elements in Christianity that are just now being wrestled with in a serious way. So yeah, once we recognize that a good deal of the New Testament, whether or not there's a historical Jesus, that a good deal of the New Testament is straight up fiction, there for theological and political reasons, then it becomes, it makes sense to ask, what are the models for Jesus? What are the, a lot of scholars, and here a lot of mainstream scholars, and some not so mainstream too, some mythicists, point to the pagan parallels, and they'll use pagan mystery gods as a example of how Jesus was really just, another pagan mystery god. That in itself suggests that much of the New Testament is symbolic and worked for allegorical and theological reasons.
Yeah. So you said something about Caesar. I wanted to take notice, and you said he died on the 15th of March, which is the 15th of Nisan.
Right.
Which is
Passover was going on right when Julius Caesar.
The same time as Jesus.
The 15th of the same month.
Kind of weird, isn't it? So
right.
let's just play coincidence. But I want our audience, while we do this, to kind of go, well, damn it, how many of these coincidences can we have before we say maybe, just maybe, there's something here? I get it, guys. Abraham Lincoln and John F. Kennedy had ridiculous coincidences.
Well, there are a lot of parallels, and there is something to the criticism that one could go crazy with parallels, parallel mania, because, there are patterns in human life. There are overlaps. People who are, born in, we're human beings. We're born into context, and many of us, people looking at political careers and they say, "Oh, this was a prototypical political career or a prototypical journalistic career." There's going to be commonalities. There's going to be echoes and parallels between two different real life people.
Right.
So we can go crazy with the parallels. So what I like to do is start with the ideology.
Okay.
And that is a nice pin, you see. A lot of times, people who are critics of Roman provenance in general will say that Roman philosophy just doesn't stand up against Christian philosophy. Christianity is advocating a whole series of moral and even political ideas that are simply not friendly to Roman ideology or culture. I have argued strenuously that that is not the case, and that is a failure to appreciate Roman culture. Especially in the first century BC and the first century of the Common Era, the political ideology that was current at the time very, very much echoes the ideology in the New Testament. Julius Caesar, being head of the Popular Party, for example, wanted agrarian reforms that would have taken land from the rich. And so, woe to the rich, it'll say. Wait a minute here, weren't the Romans a wealthy aristocratic society that fostered commerce and didn't hate the wealthy? Well, that's true, but the Caesars happened to belong to a party that did disfavor the existing wealthy establishment and called for agrarian reforms that would have made life for the wealthy uncomfortable. They helped the poor. Julius Caesar, as head of the Popular Party, went out of his way, as I said earlier, to pay rents, to pay debts of poor people, to feed the poor in massive grain distributions. In his will, he left a huge sum of money to the Roman populace as a whole. His successor, his heir, Octavian, who would later be called Augustus, who would later be the first emperor, made good on Julius Caesar's will. As the adopted son of Julius Caesar, he had to pay this stipend to the people, and to do so, since Mark Antony would not hand over all of Caesar's money, Octavian sold all of his possessions, like the rich young man was told to do by Jesus, sold all of his possessions so he could make this bounty that was given by Julius Caesar to every person, every citizen of Rome. So the Caesars were on the side of the people, the common man. And so they fed the poor, they helped the poor financially, and they even favored financial reforms that would have made life uncomfortable for the rich. So it's a good place to start is with political ideology, I think, because that can serve as an anchor for everything else that we later discuss.
Well, Francesco Pirotta, being he wrote that book, I couldn't get a hold of him. Okay, I've been trying to figure out how we're going to get a hold of this guy. And then another thing is there's a language barrier, so it's going to be like, how good can a show get? So I know
the funny thing is he's a linguist, and he knows Italian, German, French, Latin, Greek. So as a linguist, he has a lot of languages. Unfortunately, English is not his forte.
Well, being that Christianity is like most thoroughly discussed in America, that would be a language I'd try to put in my pocket if I were him. But look, this is interesting. You brought up, let's look at something political, for example. We know that there were, and I wrote down some stuff that I thought was interesting. The Romans had, and some people, probably a lot, had as many debts as they did assets. And they had practically as much as they owned as how much they owed. So practically they had nothing. If they had to pay their debts, they had nothing. And here we have our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. He says to forgive our debts as we forgive our debtors in Greek. That's the common idea. It's not just sins, it's debts. And so talk about Caesar. What did he do, and why is this significant that Pirotta brings this up?
Oh, that's exactly what Caesar would do. As I said, he would pay the debts of the poor. He would pay the debts of his friends. He would pay the debts of his allies. Mark Antony was a bankrupt, we're told, when he was very young, and who paid his debts, bailed him out. Wealthy Julius Caesar. So this Julius Caesar is ideologically connected to Jesus in many intimate ways that are, frankly, more than I think what coincidence would show. Julius Caesar, for example, famously said, "What have I spared these people just so they could kill me? If they're not against us, they're for us." Things that Jesus, in effect, is quoted as saying in the Gospels. Jesus and Julius Caesar both forgave their enemies. Julius Caesar, very famously, fought a battle of Pharsalus against the forces of Pompey the Great, the Republican forces. And some of his old friends were fighting for Pompey. When Julius Caesar won the battle of Pharsalus, he pardoned a lot of the leading men who were fighting for Pompey the Great, Pompeius Magnus. These included the men who would go on to assassinate Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar not only pardoned them, but gave them political office, restored their careers, in fact. So he forgave his enemies. He loved his enemies. And he would go on to be a martyr to his own mercy, you see. So clementia, mercy or forgiveness, was first deified on Roman coins at about the same time as the assassination of Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar was considered, his deity even, was associated with his mercy, forgiveness, loving his enemies, and being betrayed by people who he had forgiven.
That's interesting. You bring up Pompey, okay, and he was an enemy of Julius Caesar. Now,
at one time an ally. He was a patron at one time, politically speaking, and an ally. Julius Caesar's only Roman child, a daughter by the only child that one of his Roman wives ever gave him, was married to Pompey the Great. So the Pompey the Great, although older than Julius Caesar, it was his third wife or something, married Julius Caesar's daughter, Julius Caesar's only Roman child. And she died in childbirth along with the child. And that kind of broke while Julius Caesar was up in Gaul, modern day France, conquering that for the Romans. And that sort of broke their family connection. And thereafter, Pompey was courted while Julius Caesar was in Gaul, conquering and becoming ever more popular and threatening. Pompey was courted by the aristocratic faction, who he was won over by. And he basically then fought Julius Caesar on behalf of the aristocratic faction, including famous people like Cato the Younger, Cicero, Brutus, and Cassius, who would go on to be assassins of Julius Caesar.
So let me ask you this. I want to do some parallels with you because I know you're dealing with ideology, and I figure why not tackle both, just to get our audience a little bit like, okay, maybe something could be going on here. If you haven't heard this, I think you're going to like this. I immediately go, my ears perk up. This doesn't mean anything with certainty, but this does mean for me, further investigation is needed, in my opinion, and it's easy to copy something that's been previously written into a narrative that you think is obviously something glorified, something very significant in history. So I want to read some stuff. They both die on Nisan, okay? Both are son of God. In fact,
yes. Very much so.
Son of Venus.
Julius Caesar claims to be the descendant of Venus, the goddess of love, right? Who's represented, symbolized by a dove. Love and dove are the main aspect, animal aspect and ruling area of his ancestress Venus, the goddess of love.
Mercy, Clemente.
He built a temple to birth giver Venus, or Mother Venus, Venus Genetrix, in Rome. And would thereafter be one of the great important temples in Rome, the temple of Venus, the birth giver, or Venus the Mother, his own ancestor, you see. So he was a son of, he could claim to be a son of God, Divus Filius, just as his own adopted son could be, you see, was a son of a god, Divus Filius. So both Julius Caesar and his successor, Augustus Caesar, claimed on their coins and so forth to be Son of God.
Also, they both were accused of kingship, like you said earlier with Caesar. Okay, he's saying, no, I'm not, I'm not,
I'm not a king, I'm Caesar.
I'm Caesar, I'm not a
And
king.
that's
And
almost echoed in the language of the New Testament. We have no king
yes,
but Caesar. But what's interesting is that Julius Caesar was accused of wanting to be a king. In the forum, his leading agent, Mark Antony, had tried to get him to take a crown on his head, and 3 times Julius Caesar refused. No, I'm not going to be a king. I'm not going to be a king. I'm not going to be a king. Maybe Julius Caesar ultimately wanted to be a king, and if he hadn't been assassinated, he would have made a shot at it. We were told that right at the time of his assassination, the Senate was considering proposals that would have in effect made him king, at least outside of Rome. Julius Caesar had struck up a relationship when he was in Egypt with Cleopatra, had married her in an Egyptian ceremony, and had a child with her, according to Cleopatra, Caesarion. And so he was worshipped as the king of Egypt and an Egyptian man god in Egypt during his own lifetime. And so that made Romans fearful that he would make himself king of Rome, since he was, after all, dictator for life, the supreme priest, the Pontifex Maximus, the high priest in Rome, title now carried by the popes, by the way, Pontifex Maximus. He was Pontifex Maximus. And the parallels in the life of Jesus and according to the Gospels and Julius Caesar are sort of allegorical, there's no doubt. Julius Caesar, for example, has his great success in Gaul, Jesus in Galilee. And both descend from the north. Gaul is north of Rome, just as Galilee is north of Jerusalem. Both travel south from Gaul or Galilee, crossing a river, importantly, either the Rubicon or the Jordan, and then both have a triumphal entry as they come into Jerusalem. Julius Caesar literally experiences a triumph. In time, he would experience multiple triumphs, in fact, for his various conquests. Jesus also has a triumphal entry into Jerusalem. The Senate, the same word, by the way, really, that we get the word Sanhedrin for. Okay? So the Senate accuses, believing Julius Caesar would make himself king, kills Julius Caesar and martyrs him. The Sanhedrin, right?
same.
So the same. With the Sanhedrin, it's really Mosaic blasphemy, right? And the concern that develops in the trial is Jesus one of these king messiahs? And so he has the dialogue with Pilate, my kingdom is not of this earth. You have nothing to worry about from me as an earthly messiah, but I'm not. He denies being a king, just as the crowd, we have no king but Caesar, denies that, in effect, Jesus being a king. But both are martyred, and then both experience on the same day, and both experience a deification after their murders.
It's interesting because I hear historicists all the time, and this doesn't go for every one of them, but the ones that don't like to, they say there's not really that much of a parallel to Jesus. They take him so much as a human, and this narrative so much as a human, that I think that they disregard the death, burial, resurrection as necessarily a divine, apotheosis type concept, where the death, burial, resurrection, and
it wouldn't
I mean?
be, yeah, some of these parallels would only seem vague if it weren't for the fact that one of the assassins of Julius Caesar is Cassius Longinus. So he's stabbed by a Cassius Longinus. Well, who's the Roman soldier who spears Jesus? Longinus. Julius Caesar is betrayed by Judas, one of his own. Well, Brutus, Junius, Junius Brutus is like Judas, Junius Brutus, which is his family name plus his cognomen, very much like Judas, betrays. They were close friends, Brutus and Julius Caesar. In fact, Julius Caesar is said to have had an affair with Brutus's mother, Servilia, And although the timing really doesn't work out for him to be the natural father of Brutus, people noted the similarity of looks between Brutus and Julius Caesar. And there was a joke that Servilia's children, including Brutus, were the natural children of Julius Caesar, her lover. And so there was a thought that Brutus might have even been Julius Caesar's natural son. But they were close. They were you can see how intimate their families were just from the fact that Julius Caesar had a relationship with his mother. So Julius Caesar is definitely betrayed by a man he forgave and who was an old friend of his, Brutus, just as Judas is a betrayer of Jesus. And both are killed by a senate. Both are killed for claiming to be kings, as it were, but both deny it. It's
interesting. They're going into another parallel that they're both obviously wearing red robe or purple robe, if you will, and a crown. Of course, we got crown of thorns, and then we have the wreath. But
what is the crown of thorns doing on Jesus?
Good question.
We're trying with the purple robe. We're trying to show that mock the idea that he's a Messiah.
Right.
Mock that he's a Messiah, a king. Is he a king? Well, we'll mock the idea, and we'll put a crown of thorns on him. With Julius Caesar, of course, with Romans, of course, they don't have crowns, but they do have wreaths. And what wreaths signify, they're a military decoration in the Roman world. Soldiers, officers, you'd have to be of a certain rank to get certain awards, right? But to win certain crowns, you have to achieve certain things in battle, right? And so depending on your achievements in battle, there's certain crowns that you can wear as an officer, as a general. And Julius Caesar, his statues, in classical world, they would dress the statues. So Julius Caesar's own statues would be dressed and crowned with the kind of wreaths. Now, we classically think of the laurel wreath, right? But the Romans had several different kinds, oak crown, different kinds of crowns that would resemble literally crowns of thorns, natural vegetable matter crowns, right? Literally made from the vegetation, say, at around the battle scene, which is what they're supposed to be taken from. So Jesus is really wearing a crown that much more resembles one of these Roman wreaths of the very sort that generals like Julius Caesar would wear. And Pirotta observes that the very crown that Julius Caesar would have had, his image would have had at his funeral, would have been a crown of thorns.
I actually also would suggest, obviously, in light of the fact that you brought up an interesting combination, we see Judaism. When I say Judaism, let's just say Hebrew scriptures, okay, implemented in the New Testament. So some form of a blend could easily be going on. And to me, a crown of thorns on the head could signify taking upon the curse, okay? And if you go back to a Genesis account and look at Adam is going to have to labor, the thorns and thistles are produced. Okay. This idea of thorns and thistles are now the curse, that the ground is going to produce thorns and thistles. He's wearing now the curse because he's becoming the curse. Cursed is any man who hangs on a tree. So there is this I'm still Roman issue kind of thing with the curse being brought on him too. So I wonder if it's twofold. It could very well be a Jewish blend of a story. Hey, we're copying the passion of Caesar, and yet using Jewish, Hebrew scriptures on this thing and making a pagan blend of our own.
That's the best it can be, right? There's a massive Jewish element, and there's no question. In previous interviews, we've discussed this in detail. There's so much of the New Testament is simply modeled on Hebrew scripture. And, the slaughter of the innocents start off in Matthew. We've got a star. We've got the slaughter of the babies. We've got dreams, prophetic dreams to a Joseph that take Joseph to Egypt in Matthew. And over and over, we've got every single aspect of Jesus basically in the Gospels is an echo of something in Hebrew scripture, whether it's Isaiah's suffering servant, whether it's Joseph and 30 pieces of silver and being sold into slavery by his brothers, on and on and on. Moses, Mount Sinai, Jesus, the Sermon on the Mount. Samuel's mother Hannah glorifying at her miraculous pregnancy Elizabeth and Mary and Luke glorifying at their fortunate motherhoods in almost identical language. The parallels with Hebrew scripture are impossible to miss. And Francesco Pirotta does not deny that the Hebrew scriptures are being layered in and double parallels, that the Gospels are an extremely sophisticated work of literature, aren't they? There is nothing in Jewish literature that should suggest a man God in the Messiah, a divine Messiah. The Messiah they expected was an earthly, military, political leader, man. Judaism is strict monotheism. Never, ever, ever, until Christianity, was there a form of Judaism that worshipped a man God. That's totally unprecedented and totally pagan. Julius Caesar is the first man god to be worshipped officially by the Romans since Romulus, their founder.
I like this. I like what you're bringing up here, because the best way I can, see where you're going with that for our audience, the man god Jesus, of course, if you look at Julius Caesar, let's go into the passion narrative here. Back up for a second, where we talked about how Julius was claiming to be king, and Jesus never hides it. It makes me think, if there was a historical Jesus, just bringing this point, if there was a historical Jesus, he probably was the opposite of what he's glorified for. So, for example, Julius is known as a dictator. Julius Caesar was known as a dictator to many people.
But the dictator has a negative connotation to us.
Right.
For the ancient Romans, it was just an office of state.
But he's a military command. He's somebody of military might, but known for clementia, known for the peace and love and this. Well, Jesus, if there was one, could very well have been like the Egyptian, like Judah the Galilean, just like some of these guys. The only problem I have with it is, give me the contemporary source. So obviously I don't have that, but I like this idea. If we can travel to the next point I'd like to bring, both of these gentlemen, Julius Caesar and Jesus the Christ, of course, in John, the Gospel of John, he meets with Nicodemus at night, and Julius Caesar meets with another man. And what was his name?
Nicomedes.
Nicomedes.
Well,
at night too.
Well, meet at night. Yeah. Nicomedes, the king of Bithynia, and Jesus were said to have had, or Julius Caesar, excuse me, were said to have had a homosexual relationship.
Oh. Didn't mean to burst that bubble. PG-13
so
coming to you soon.
Did they meet at night? I'll bet they had some interesting meetings at night. Yeah. So there are name parallels, all over the place. But then again, we can reassign names, and that's what Pirotta does. He tries to line up different figures. Obviously, Judas is Junius Brutus, right?
Right.
Just as Julius Caesar is Jesus Christ. Use the Latin pronunciation correctly.
Right.
Mary Magdalene is Cleopatra. Right?
Well, that's an interesting one.
The woman who recognizes the guy as divine during his lifetime.
Well, Magdala means the woman of the tower, and I thought this was interesting because Cleopatra, who was Caesar's wife, she is the woman in Alexandria, in the Tower of Egypt and Alexandria in Egypt. And so Mary Magdala could very well be the woman of the tower here, mimicking this, but keeping the Mary. The Mary would be something, Maria. This is obviously another connection that one could take, but it's also very Jewish. So it's...
Well, interestingly, Julius Caesar was, in effect, the leader of the Popular Party in succession from his uncle. His aunt, Julia, had married Gaius Marius, a very famous figure in the Popular Party, both a general and leader of the Popular Party. And Gaius Marius, if he were to have daughters, they would all be Marys. Just as any woman in the Julian family would all be Julias. So Julius Caesar was himself, in effect, a kind of a son, if you will, of a Marius, And that this is something Pirotta points out. I'm not sure how far we can press this, but certainly one of the leaders of the popular party, the uncle of Julius Caesar himself, his daughters would all be Marians.
Interesting. Okay, another one. John the Baptist gets beheaded. Okay, so does Pompey.
Right. Pompey the Great, after the Battle of Pharsalus in Greece, flees to Egypt where he has old friends, only to have his head cut off. And Julius Caesar is most distressed. The Egyptians thought, that Julius Caesar had just fought a battle with Pompeius Magnus, that by executing Pompey, they would please Julius Caesar. Turned out they were wrong. Julius Caesar was most upset and did punish the guys who did it, and gave Pompey as good a funeral as he could afterwards. After all, he had been his son-in-law and a consul of Rome. And Julius Caesar, even though he'd fought a battle with him, had long ago been an ally of his.
Wow, man. I mean,
so John the Baptist, you see, is sort of a predecessor, patron of Julius Caesar at one point, just as John the Baptist is sort of presented as being Jesus in the Gospels. And so there's a character that fits, you see, with every character in the life of Jesus, there's sort of a character that fits in the life of Julius Caesar.
Right. Okay. What about someone washes their hands at the betrayal of Jesus and Julius Caesar?
One of Julius Caesar's aristocratic friends, a guy named Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, in effect doesn't participate, although many of his aristocratic friends do participate in the assassination, and Lepidus in effect washes his hands of any guilt for the assassination. And he himself would go on to be an ally of Antony and Augustus in the Second Triumvirate.
And of course, we all know Pontius Pilate does the same in the New Testament narrative. He washes his hands. Okay.
Right.
Both have a special one. We already went over this with the women, Cleopatra and Mary Magdalene. What about I came, I saw, I conquered?
This, I think, is a little thinner.
Okay.
He's trying to find a verbal parallel between what Julius Caesar says and what Jesus says. We've gone over, I think, what I think the strongest ones are. But think about it. I came, I saw, I conquered. Does that really reflect Jesus' language?
I came, I washed, I saw. I came, I saw, I conquered.
It's got the same style.
Yeah.
It has that same pithy sort of style. We also can note, as Pirotta does, the Latinisms. And I think this is maybe more interesting. I think, no king but Caesar is good. And we had another one too. But it's really interesting because Mark, what many scholars regard as the oldest of the Gospels, is also known for having Latinisms. Linguistic, even though it's written originally in Greek, there are some scholars who've actually theorized that it might have originally been written in Latin in Rome. That's a very much minority theory, but there are Latinisms in the Greek of Mark, and Latinisms that would be common in the Roman army. In fact, the Roman army in the east of the empire, where Judea is, they would be speaking Greek, and they would be speaking Greek peppered with Latinisms, military Latinisms, the very sort of Latinisms like legion that we find in Mark. So Mark seems to be written in the Greek that Roman soldiers in the Eastern Roman Empire would understand.
I find it fascinating, Dennis R. MacDonald's book with the Homeric epics and the Iliad and how he looks at it. Mark, that's a great parallel to pagan, the pagan world, Greco-Roman world, if you will, because the Romans obviously adopted the Greeks' ideas and the Homeric epics, and you're going to use that in your gospel.
I know this is a bit of a tangent considering we're talking about Pirotta's work, but Pirotta himself observes that Julius Caesar's birthday would be celebrated right on the last day of the festival of Apollo in Rome. This led to a natural conflation of Apollo and Julius Caesar, and of course Jesus is very much depicted as a sun god, prophetic Phoebus light god, who's resurrected at dawn just like the sun. And so Julius Caesar in effect became a sun god, very much like Jesus, if there's parallel to paganism. I also would like to note that I was watching the other day a video that tried to by a Christian apologist who was trying to downplay the pagan parallels, and they were noting the differences between, say, Romulus, the legendary founder of Rome, who was the child of Mars and a Vestal Virgin, who was taken up into heaven and deified, so forth, and Asclepius, the healer god, the son of Apollo and a mortal woman who healed and resurrected the dead, only to be martyred by the gods and then have an apotheosis and become a god himself. And they were saying that these parallels are not good enough because there's no bodily resurrection, for example, with them. We do have a bodily resurrection, though, with the Egyptian god Osiris, who's literally physically put back together by Isis. And the body is in fact imbued with the new spirit of the god. And that was their understanding of the divinity of their pharaohs. The pharaohs could be, in effect, reincarnations of the god because they're imbued by the spirit of the god, and their body is this housing. But the body itself gets resurrected. That's why they mummify in Egyptian religion. What we see with something like Serapis, the fusion of gods into this one created god by the Ptolemy the first Greek pharaoh of Egypt, who was a general of Alexander the Great's. He fused Asclepius and Osiris, so that we have someone with a physical resurrection, Osiris, and Asclepius, which is an interesting fusion, if you will, especially in light of the fact that Julius Caesar was deified in his lifetime by Cleopatra, the heir of Ptolemy the First, who had created Serapis.
Wow.
And exactly. So you have a lot of during Julius Caesar's own lifetime, his divinity in Egypt would no doubt have been modeled on Apollo, Serapis, Hades, Zeus, and back home on Romulus as well. So if we find parallels between Jesus and Romulus, or Jesus and Asclepius, or Jesus and Serapis or Osiris, then those parallels can be seen as coming together, and first coming together in the cult perhaps of the divine Julius Caesar. When Julius Caesar died, it is said that a comet was seen racing across the sky. So a star indicates the soul of Julius Caesar going up to heaven as a god. A star heralds the death of Julius Caesar, just as a star heralds the birth of Jesus Christ. Unfortunately, we do not have the birth narratives of Julius Caesar from our ancient pagan biographies of Julius Caesar. Suetonius's and Plutarch, they both write biographies of Julius Caesar that were written, either late first century or early second century, and their birth narratives and nativity stories about Julius Caesar are simply missing. We don't have them. And why?
So wild speculation and just a guess could be,
Well,
why. I mean,
Julius Caesar was a man of aristocratic lineage, divine lineage, right? He's a descendant of kings and gods, but he also was a self-made man of humble background. And we don't have his birth narrative, which might have been a relatively humble scenario.
Which could have
and involved
obvious.
a star. And if that had been the case, if Julius Caesar had had a humble birth that was heralded by a star, which is very easy to suppose given the star at his death and the humble circumstances of his own family at the time, although he has this exalted aristocratic lineage, just like Jesus. Julius Caesar was regarded as a savior, a sotor, in effect a messianic figure by the people of Rome. And Julius Caesar, at the time of his death, was sincerely worshipped by the common people of Rome too. When Julius Caesar was assassinated, the spot where his body was burned, normally this is a big break with Roman precedent, right? Normally you take the body outside of the city and you burn it outside of the city. The Romans had pretty good sanitary standards when it came to the dealing with corpses. You take the body outside the city and burn it. Julius Caesar had the honor, if you will, of being cremated right there in the heart of the old city of Rome. And on the spot where he was cremated, Before the Senate officially deified Julius Caesar, the common people built a makeshift altar there to worship Julius Caesar because he paid their debts. He was fighting their cause. We think of emperors as being despots, tyrants, dictators, but and being unpopular. No. The people loved the emperors. The people loved, generally speaking, and distrusted the aristocrats in the Senate. The emperors, in succession of Julius Caesar, were defenders, at their best, of the ordinary guy in the street. So the ordinary person in Rome worshipped Julius Caesar and took very seriously the idea that he was a god. So that when Julius Caesar's cult developed and the Senate did order an altar and a temple right there, an official temple right there at the same spot for the worship of Julius Caesar, there were altars and images of Julius Caesar put in all the temples, and there were temples and images put in various colonies all around the Roman Empire, so that Romans anywhere in the world could worship this ruler of the world, bringer of peace to the world, and he was worshipped for doing just that. His successor, Augustus, one of the main aspects of Augustus's propaganda was, one, the deification of his adopted father and uncle Julius Caesar, and two, the fact that Augustus had brought peace to the whole world, peace for the whole world, peace on earth. The same ideas that would be taken up by the Flavians about a century later by Vespasian and Titus, bringers of peace to the whole world. So both ideologically, you can see there are even more parallels with the star, with the common guy actually worshiping Julius Caesar as a divinity. Pirotta, in the maps at the very end of his book, shows where the Christianity, the cultic sites of Christianity in its very beginning, overlays a map above that, has a map of the imperial cultic sites, and they're a perfect match. Christianity took off and was centered in the very places where the imperial cult existed in the Roman Empire.
This makes me want to ask so many questions, because many people, and I agree, suggest that a lot of things that we find in Christianity come from pagan sources like Rome, things like that. I mean, anyone who has the slightest idea of some of these traditions will look and see, okay, they enshrine Jesus to this day, and they have him in a model form inside of what looks like the Temple of Venus, okay, the same pillars as the Temple of Venus has. Inside this box they carry today, with the Vicar of Christ, and the Roman Catholics are practicing the same Roman ritual. And, well, it's either Roman Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy that are two oldest that we know of in history. Now, what happens usually is they say, well, the problem is, guys, you're taking a later adaptation by church fathers, and you've got the earliest Christianity wrong. But when we find these elements that we discussed here on the show in the texts we have today, okay, and we see these parallels, is it really wrong of us to assume that really what's going on is, yes, there was maybe an oral tradition in early Christianity that was probably a very mystery school type religion that is influenced by these cults, the Caesar cults, as well as their Jewish roots, that are willing to let go of something like Torah, that are willing to see beyond these things and say, hey, we've found it. This is a new thing. This is a whole new, I
find it hard to believe that Christianity was, as you know, was a wholly organic thing within Judaism. It chucks in Jewish exceptionalism. It chucks in the idea of the Messiah being a god, and it's worshiping a man god now, totally unprecedented. It's changing the most distinctive features of Judaism all at once, simultaneously: kosher diet, circumcision, strict Sabbath observance, along with, as I say, the whole idea of Jewish exceptionalism, kicking the door open to everybody, and now worshiping a man god like a mystery religion, a pagan man god like a Caesar, if you will. So there is no doubt in my mind that there's a powerful pagan influence and a paganizing influence that we see in Christianity as distinct from any other form of Judaism, right? There's no question in my mind that it's not a fully organic. I don't. Pirotta identifies Paul with Josephus. I don't necessarily buy that. He notices the shipwreck, and he notices that Acts and the autobiography of Josephus have a lot of parallels, as we've noticed. And he's a mythicist. He says there can't be really a historical Jesus if we're going to say that Julius Caesar is the model or a significant model for Jesus, just with some Jewish elements added to it. I disagree with that too. I think there could have been a historical Jesus. Had to be pretty empty vessel, as I pointed out. Not much could have been known with certainty about him for him to take on all the features that the New Testament gives him. But there is little doubt that the New Testament itself, forget later tradition, it is true that when Christianity becomes the official religion of the Roman Empire in the 4th century, everything changes. There's a whole hierarchy of priests that are now put into place. Paganism is pushed out. And there is an official doctrine now, a dogma. They call the Council of Nicaea to start getting this dogma squared away so that disagreements between various Christians are now smoothed out, and people with extreme views on either side, like Gnostics say, or others as time went on, Pelagians and Arians and whatnot, were regarded as heretics. And the official take on Jesus and his divinity, and then by the end of the 4th century, you have a canon, the New Testament as we know it, the books that were accepted, the books that as sacred and true, and then the rest, which are probably the books of some heretical deviants. But these heretical deviants were just as valid a Christianity in the 2nd century and in the 3rd century as anything else, right? And in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, there's all sorts of Christianities. Who knows what books they're using? Some, as we said earlier, may be using Mark, some may be using Luke and Acts, and some may be just using the Pauline epistles, or some may be using a different configuration of others. But what we have in the New Testament, putting aside what the later church organization may have brought down on everything, in the New Testament itself, which is the earliest Christian literature we possess, we definitely see pagan parallels, and we see, in my view, both Julius Caesar and Flavian parallels.
That's really the crux of the argument right there, because I mean, anyone who looks at Rome and looks at how Roman Catholicism does stuff, and then looks at Roman history and looks at these things, can go, oh yeah, of course, like the Easter burning, the Easter fire, okay? I mean, that's the cremation of Caesar, yet it's practiced by Rome, and they incorporated it into
Why
the
is there a little fire in Catholic, ritual going back who knows how long? They're burning a fire in Easter in Catholic tradition. What is that but a funeral pyre?
Yeah, and I mean, you don't find that with Jesus.
Pirotta, one of the more interesting things Pirotta points out is that the funeral of Julius Caesar, the famous funeral of Julius Caesar, it's made famous in drama by Shakespeare in his play Julius Caesar, right? Mark Antony comes out, friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. Well, that speech, I'm not come here to praise, but to bury Caesar and all that, is from Shakespeare's dramatization of the death of Julius Caesar and its immediate aftermath. So monumental event, right? The assassination of Julius Caesar. Well, that funeral where Mark Antony famously speaks is recreated by Pirotta, and he, using the tradition of Roman funerals as well as the specific description of Julius Caesar's funeral, we can know several things that are really, really interesting. An effigy, a dummy of an image of the dead person was made. Let's put it that way. Why did they make the image? So that because Romans cremated the dead, there'd be an image of the dead person who'd survived through the whole funeral, right? And so oftentimes the funeral, if the person died outside of Rome and had to be cremated there, the funeral procession would bring their ashes back to Rome, being led by a effigy, an image of the person, sometimes lying down on a litter so that they could be carried in with the ashes. At Julius Caesar's funeral, the body was put on a bier so that it could be burnt on a funeral pyre. So you could have like the Easter fire and a funeral pyre right there in the forum, right? But the body was put on the rostra, which is where people would make public speeches at the Forum. So it's like the central place in all of Rome. The body was put on a bier there and was burnt right there. And the image, the effigy of Julius Caesar, because he had been a successful general, a triumph general. One of the perks you get as a triumphant general is in your triumph, that was a parade, a procession too, that would go under a triumphal arch often. But what would be carried is something known as the tropaeum, a post that would have symbolically carry the armor and spoils of the conquered people of the successful general. In Julius Caesar's case, he had conquered the Gauls. He had conquered in Africa. He conquered in Asia Minor and in Egypt. Julius Caesar gets 4 triumphs, had earned 4 tropaeums, right? And so at his funeral, he was put up on a tropaeum. Excuse me. He was put on a tropaeum himself in effigy, so that the effigy of Julius Caesar, in effect, is on a post, which is laid out like a cross. So there's Julius Caesar, in effect, on a cross as Jesus was, in effect, on a cross being crucified. It was at this funeral that before the burning of the body, Mark Antony would go down, pick up the robes that Julius Caesar had been assassinated in, showing the stab marks and the bloody stains on the robe, right? And dramatically showed it to the Roman crowd, getting them all heated up and bothered because Julius Caesar was enormously popular. And Mark Antony whipped up the crowd by showing the bloody stabbed robes of Julius Caesar right there underneath the image of Julius Caesar, in effect, hanging on a cross.
And that's obviously right there, interesting parallel to a crucifixion of Jesus, which is why you have, in my opinion, you've got to have reservations if you do look at these things and go, well, if this is the case, does this mean that Jesus literally was crucified? Could be, but it just makes me think there's one more possible. It's possible.
Well, remember that the suffering servant of Isaiah has to be pierced for our transgressions, right? And the Jewish rebellion is going to involve crucifixion, a lot of crucifixion. And rebel leaders, like who knows how many rebel leaders were crucified, messianic figures are going to be crucified. And so for Jesus as a Messiah, crucifixion has a particular connection. Messianic claimants of the first century were crucified. The suffering servant of Isaiah must be pierced for the transgressions of the people. So Julius Caesar is not crucified. He's stabbed in the entryway to the Senate, right? Famously. And it was a huge scandal. You shouldn't bring knives into the Senate at all, right? Senate is for discussion and peaceful debate. We leave all the weapons outside. The person of the consul or the dictator is sacred, so that to lay hands or to touch Julius Caesar at all was to violate Roman law. And so it was a sacrilege to the Roman gods what happened to Julius Caesar. And it was regarded by the Romans in those terms, in religious terms. The republic was a sacred institution protected by the gods. And so to secret knives into the Senate, to lay hands violently on the sacred person of the high priest, the dictator, the consul, Julius Caesar, was a sacrilege of the highest order. And this led into the ideas of Julius Caesar's martyrdom. But he's not crucified, he's stabbed. As we noted earlier, Jesus is, of course, speared by a Longinus, just as Julius Caesar stabbed by a Longinus.
Yeah, I don't know how far, one wants to take some of the details, right? Like,
I think it's tempting to stop right there, as Pirotta does, right? But I think we can't stop right there. I think Pirotta provides an important piece of the puzzle. From the time that I was myself first alerted to Roman providence as an idea just from reading Josephus in the Bible, way back in the 1980s. Since that time, scholars like Eisenman and Atwill and Pirotta have come out with their work, and that's filled in a lot of the details, in my view, but each is a piece. each has a part of the puzzle, it seems to me, and emphasizes a different part of the puzzle. Not all of Pirotta's parallels, I think, are convincing. Not all of Joseph Atwill's parallels may be necessarily true, but they've provided enough so that when we put it all together, it's overwhelming. The Flavians were the first dynasty of Roman emperors after the Julians. So they would model their divine cult on the divine cult of the Julians, the first dynasty of Roman emperors, since they're the second dynasty of Roman emperors. If there are parallels with Julius Caesar and Augustus, which I think there are, as Pirotta points out, that makes perfect sense from a Flavian providence standpoint, because here we have humble new Jewish Messiah emperors, and that's the thing. Julius Caesar was never worshipped as a Jewish Messiah. He never claimed to be a Jewish Messiah. Pirotta makes a point about how Julius Caesar was friendly to the Jewish population and relatively good to them as Roman leaders went, but I don't think that's good enough. The Flavians, in the persons of Vespasian and Titus, were actually regarded as Jewish messiahs by leading Jewish figures like Josephus and Rabbi Yohanan ben Zakkai. In Ben Zakkai's case, it may have merely been a political convenience and not sincere, but in any case, they were, both Vespasian and Titus. They were the conquerors of the Jews in the Jewish war. And again, Julius Caesar may have connections with Egyptian mystery cult gods, right? And certainly has a connection to Greek gods, Aphrodite, Venus, Apollo, that he's later identified with. But here with the Flavians, we have an actual identification with Serapis on their coins. On one side, you see the face of a Flavian emperor. On the other side, the Ptolemaic god Serapis, which is a fusion of Osiris, Asclepius, Zeus, Hades. And so what we're seeing is a much better development of the stew that would make Christianity, in my view, with the Flavians. They have both the Julian cult that they're trying to absorb and model themselves on, plus they are Jewish messiahs. And so they specifically would need to mine the Hebrew scriptures. They specifically would need a messiah like Jesus to bridge from Judaism into a pagan cult, their own imperial cult. And of course, the Gospels are being written during the Flavian era.
Right. Something that I guess, I don't know if there's a connection here, but I want to throw this out just to get your thoughts. I've heard people say this. So the bright and morning star, okay, a lot of people say is Venus, okay? This is Jewish, right? But yet Julius Caesar is the son of God, or a son of God, who, descendant of Venus.
That's right.
And so I ask myself, I mean, not saying this has to be, just say, let's say someone walks away and goes, you know what, cool theory, guys. You can take your tinfoil hat off now. Your dimethyltryptamine pipe, you can set that to the side.
Yes, put the drugs aside, boys.
Put the cocaine, the crack, and the meth, and your psychosis away. Okay?
Right.
But regardless, let's say they don't buy into Roman provenance. Let's concede, right? Okay, guys, got it. It was a cool, interesting idea. We just threw together. However, Dr. Robert M. Price came on, and he showed pagan parallels. Suppose Venus is another pagan parallel to Jewish. Let's say you're like, you know what, I can't accept this. I think it's organically out of Judaism somehow. And yeah, they lost their way, and they became so Hellenized in so many ways, blah, blah, blah. I think there's still these connections, like this Venus connection with being the bright and morning star, connecting it to here's Julius Caesar doing the same thing. And that Greco-Roman influence being Hellenized, it's there. We're just, and I'm not educated enough to be so certain, but I am influenced by these ideas to a point where I think Roman provenance has very good points to make. And I'd like to see, if anyone has something that they are really able to challenge on all this, I'd like to see a discussion. I'd love to see a debate, but debates are debates, man. It's like watching a football game. Who you rooting for? All right, well, I'm going to go into the game hoping they win. That's it. I want to see an actual friendly discussion where we're inside of the Senate. Don't bring your daggers, okay? And a discussion where someone who truly can handle the conversation without getting heated, but also has a lot of insight, that can challenge some of these ideas with you. And it's not, mind you, whoever's watching this, we're talking about Pirotta. Okay, this is not even the creating Christ theory. This is just purely on Pirotta's theory. And I wanted to do this. I had to get you to come join me. People have been asking, and I said, well, imagine if you combined all that you have built up, that material, to someone who doesn't agree and have a discussion on that. I think Dr. Scribina might join on whether or not Paul was actually for or against Rome. And of course, he believes he was against Rome. That might happen for our audience who's watching. But if he doesn't do it, let's hope someone else, who's got a PhD and wants to, come join the conversation.
Please.
Do you have anything that you want to close out on Pirotta's theory and maybe something we missed prior to us closing out this podcast here?
No, I think that Pirotta basically gets a lot of it right. I mean, Jesus is an extraordinary man-God. Jesus is an allegorical figure pieced together from different sources, and surely one of them is Julius Caesar. When we consider Julius Caesar in light of the later Flavian parallels, such as the healing miracles, healing the blind with spittle or a withered hand with touch and so forth, and the Serapis connections of the later Flavians, then it becomes even more powerful in my view, because then we have a whole different layer of evidence that we can add to it, and which explains Pirotta's own. So I would simply say that if all those who advocate Pirotta's ideas, if they could just back up for a second and see the Flavian parallels as well, that would help their case and complete their argument as to how it is that Julius Caesar's name, image, cult gets confused with the emergence of Christianity in the centuries to come.
And leaving on that note, you've mentioned before, just to make sure our audience is aware of the previous mention we did with Pirotta's work, is that the Flavians had a lot of influence from Julius Caesar. They looked up to his dynasty or his... Very
much so. They used the same type of propaganda, the same images from their coins. They took the name Caesar. The name Caesar. See, after the Julio-Claudians, it was not clear that future emperors would take the name Caesar. It was a family name. If you didn't belong to that family, you wouldn't take the name Caesar. So much so did the Flavians model themselves on the Julio-Claudians that they even took their name Caesar.
And that to me is also shocking because, like you said, the Julio-Claudians, they were from the lineage, correct, of Caesar.
That was their name, Caesar.
It's like you coming along as Valiant, okay,
right.
The Valliants, and I'm a Lambert,
right.
And I'm so honored by this certain character or characters, disregard the negative ones, especially the most recent one named Neron,
right.
And say, I'm going to take your name, Valiant.
Just as Octavian took the name Julius Caesar from his uncle because he was adopted. Now, notice Romans did that. They could adopt, and they did. Romans who didn't have sons, were wealthy or politically important guys, would adopt sons to carry on their name. And they would take the exact same name as their dad in most cases, just as Octavian took the exact Gaius Julius Caesar from his new adopted father. And so, in effect, what the Flavians are doing is sort of saying there's a retroactive adoption. You can call us Augustus Caesar too, because we are, in effect, the continuers of that same family, although Caesar was a family name.
I actually read a commentary a long time ago. Of course, it was a Christian commentary, but they brought up something interesting. I wanted to throw your way. You've got my interest piqued about adoption in Ephesians, okay, to the adoptions of sons. And I've heard two different angles. And one of the angles is that, well, this adoption is simply a Jewish concept and it's purely Jewish, has zero influence when it comes to Rome and Roman adoption. And then I read
Romans much more famously adopted. Romans adopted left and right.
That's what I was going to say, because in Rome, it appears, and not only that, in the same Ephesians book, you have the armor of God, and this armor of God is Roman. So
it's the Roman kit. It's the Roman kit that Paul describes as the armor of God.
Why would you name the Roman kit as the Roman armor? and then have adoptions as sons being
Right.
utilized, which is the same concept that like you've mentioned
Adoption, right?
multiple.
The adoptive whole thing. Or some people will say that God adopts Jesus at the baptism, right? This is my beloved son with whom I am well pleased. Sort of the adoption theory of messiahship. It's at that point that Jesus really becomes the Son of God, the adopted Son of God, if you will. Obviously his miraculous virgin birth suggests that the Holy Spirit is responsible. In that sense, he's a Son of God as well. But the point is that you have this whole notion of adoption in the New Testament, which sort of echoes the widespread Roman practice. You can read way back into the Republican period. Roman aristocrats are adopting left and right.
This is weird. I gave a sermon on this same adoption passage in Ephesians, and it's so predestinarian, right?
Right.
So this was an interesting story I heard. I heard it, so I copied it. This little boy, and he's got two brothers, and they're mocking him, and they're like, you know what? Because he was an adopted child, and like, you know what? Ha, you're adopted, and the kid's crying, and later on, grandma comes by, and grandpa, whoever, doesn't care. It's just a story. Sits him on the lap. What's going on? Well, they keep mocking me. You're adopted. Well, whispers in their ear, and the next time they come and start mocking, you're adopted, he's smiling. And he's like, why are you smiling? You're adopted. And he's like, well, they chose me, but they didn't have a choice with you. Now, you
were forced on them.
Right. Is this not a poke, in my opinion? Is this not kind of a poke at Israel here in terms of what Ephesians is trying to say is the chosen of natural birth? We're adopting a new family here. Are they I don't know. And look, I remain open.
The prodigal son, the Good Samaritan, right? It's
right.
The one who went astray. It's the one who left. It's the sinner. It's the one that I'm interested in, right?
Right. So I sorry I had to rabbit trail, man.
No. That was a good connection.
But the commentary was using Roman example of adoption and
Right.
saying that they would treat their adopted child better than the born child because he was adopted.
Great example happens in the middle of the 1st century. The Emperor Claudius has a natural son, Britannicus, but nonetheless he adopts the son of his niece Agrippina when he marries his niece Agrippina, and he adopts her son by a previous marriage, who goes on to be the Emperor Nero. And so, in effect, Claudius prefers his adopted son Nero over his natural son Britannicus, and Nero goes on to be the emperor who's around when Paul's writing his letters, according to many scholars.
I have so many, it just kind of keeps the door open for me. And this discussion does go into other areas of things that we're not going to do on the show, but that you and me have dealt with or discussed in the past that makes me question and just go, does this not do something bigger? But regardless, brother, I really appreciate you joining on. The book is Creating Christ. You guys have got to get this book. If you haven't got it, make sure you do. We're going to do more shows, of course, on this in the future. More shows I'd like to do, and we haven't done it on this platform yet, is you and Atwell. I'd like to get you guys on together because, well, you guys did it on Aeon Byte Gnostic Radio, and I am jealous. So I don't think it's fair. I think it's only fair that
anytime, and I'm sure Joe would agree. So
absolutely,
let's do it.
I hit him up on the phone the other day, and he's like, "Of course,
of course,
Joe's the man. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much, guys. Go down in the description in that first link right there. You guys will see the fingers pointing at the affiliate link. Go in there and get you Creating Christ. Check it out. You can get it on ebook for $5, something.
Yeah, it's really cheap.
Audiobook too, and you said the audio is really good.
Yeah, I really like the audiobook too, and it's pretty cheap too.
So. And I definitely recommend doing that, because if you're like me and you just readings just
we were also our publisher's best paperback, one of the 2 top paperback sellers for last year. So
good.
We're very pleased with how the physical book is selling too. It's got images. The book's got a lot of images, so it's often good to get the books so you can see the images if you're reading it about the right time.
I'm more of a paperback fan or an audio guy. That's just me, because like reading on ebooks too much, it's hard for my eyes to focus on the computer screen to read like that. But I can
Right.
listen or I can read it with paper better. That's just me. But guys, if you know, one of the things I always say on my shows, and I guess there's a lot in the background, these shows just pop up like they're so easy. Like, oh, this is just these just come out like Derek's just going to the bathroom again. It's nothing. Well, these scholars, what helps them bring you more of this material and to continue their research further, because I'm sure he's not stopping where he's at. He's going to discover new things, possibly even write another book down the road, is helping purchase their books. And if you can't afford it, we understand. I'm speaking to those who can, you know, to obviously get this information out there, try to encourage the purchasing of these things so that these guys can keep doing what they're doing. I'm a huge fan of that. And a lot of people always ask me, why do you have all the ads on your videos and stuff? Look, this is to help this program bring the scholars on. Obviously I have some good scholars that have come on, and I continue to do so. And you are one of them. So thank you for joining me today, brother.
Thank you, Derek. Anytime.
All right.
Pleasure.
We'll continue our heresies another time. And we are MythVision.